To help us wrap up these past 2 days, I'd like to introduce Dr. Aaron Gaines. Dr. Gaines completed his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in animal science at the University of Missouri-Columbia. Prior to Anitech, Dr. Gaines held positions at Professional Swine Management, United Animal Health, and the MASH Offs. Dr. Gaines has been in the swine industry for nearly 20 years, and as a managing partner of Anitech, he is currently focused on product development and supporting new products into the marketplace for livestock. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gaines.
Well, good afternoon. I've got the task of trying to put together final thoughts over the last couple of days, and I'm starting to get a little bit worried about it because Dean Boyd has wished me luck twice in the last 15 minutes. So we'll see how this goes. Presentation here. So before we get too far into this, I do want to thank our speakers and panel members for the last couple of days and sharing a lot of knowledge. And I thought Mike did a good job recognizing this industry because even though you didn't speak or you weren't on a panel, I know probably every one of you contributed to the knowledge that was shared over the last couple of days. So let's thank everybody for the knowledge that was shared over the last couple of days. So on Tuesday evening, I ran into Joel DeRushi and we were talking about this wrap-up. And Joel gave me some good advice, and he said, you need to pull a page out of Dr. Steve Pullman's book and put together a posse. I go, tell me more about that, Joel. He said, well, you need to get 4 or 5 people to help summarize the next couple of days in terms of final thoughts. I said, that's a really good idea. So, took him up on it. First few people I could find, that was the posse. The only person that's missing out of this picture that didn't end up in jail is Randy Anderson for some reason. I don't know if Randy's still out there or not, but he's MIA right now. But anyway, I do want to thank this group for contributing comments over the last couple of days to help me put this together. So without further ado, I'm going to go through at least 3 to 4 main points from each presentation and hopefully kind of bring this thing to an end here. Mike talked about China, and I've been to China a couple times. I'm always intrigued by that country and what's going on there. The times I've visited it, it seems like they were 20 years behind, but they are moving at a very fast pace, and I think that was very evident from Dr. Lee's presentation. We know with population growth globally, there's a significant demand for protein in that country, particularly pork and poultry. And I think he did a good job showing that what's going to happen to meat production in that country and how much strain that's going to put on global feed resources. And if you look at what they've done to identify that problem statement, I think they've done a really good job of putting together a multifaceted research plan to address that need over time. And you heard in the last presentation with Mike, will we remain as the premier swine research country in the world? I don't know. I think we're, to your point, Mike, I think we're right there on the edge of being passed up by China from what I've seen so far. We moved to Peter's talk, and I got a lot of good comments on Peter's talk on sow nutrition, and I think what Peter did was provide really good evidence that nutrition and feed management around that time of farrowing impacts sow and litter performance. We've heard a lot about transition feeding in the industry, and I think he did a good job bringing some of that supporting evidence to the table. I think as we leave here, I think there's an opportunity to validate some of those findings as it relates to that time of farrowing and how nutrition and or feed management could improve sow and litter performance. And then I think we heard it this morning, Noel was on the panel, is how are we going to execute precision feeding at the farm level, and then we got to determine, what that return on investment is. So I think there'll probably be a lot of follow-up coming out of this meeting in this area, I would expect. We moved to Dr. Patient's talk on fiber. it's interesting to hear John go through the different assays, and talking to Dr. Stein in the past. I don't know how many times he's told me crude fiber is pretty worthless, and it pretty much is, other than getting a guaranteed analysis on a feed tag. And I think most of us have moved at least NDF in formulation, but as we continue to refine some of these methods for assaying fiber, some of us are moving to total dietary fiber, and I think that's going to explain a lot more on how we feed fiber in pigs. And certainly, since 2007, with the advent of ethanol, fiber's not going away. So we need to figure out how to use it more effectively in swine diets, because it is going to be an ingredient that we're going to have to use. I think the other thing that John pointed out in his talk, that fiber can be helpful in health-challenged pigs, but I think there's still a lot to learn as it relates to what is that optimum insoluble to soluble fiber ratio, and maybe how that changes in that pig's life. I think the other thing that John brought to light that's important is this interaction between fiber and protein, and we need to be mindful of that excess protein, particularly in these health-challenged pigs, as some of that undigested fiber gets to the hindgut and maybe exacerbates some of the enteric challenges that we're seeing. Move to the conversation on feed mills. I know Cassie moderated that. That was a really good discussion, and brought to light some key things that can be applied when you're working with a feed mill, and even within the overall business. And Chris brought up the point about communication, and communication is certainly one of the struggles, I think, within any organization. And he certainly brought that to light when he talked about the communication between the nutritionist and the feed mill, and that being a very critical piece. I think part of that too is also building an effective relationship with the overall feed and production teams. That becomes really important as well. And I know Omar and I, over the past decade, spent a lot of time on this. Is, your job as a nutritionist doesn't stop at the feed mill, and you're responsible from formulation all the way to the point that feed is hitting that pig's mouth. And I think that's something else we need to keep in mind. And the feed mill is certainly part of that process, and they need to understand why that's important. I think the other thing we heard this multiple times over the last couple of days, is you can't manage what you don't measure. And the panel brought to light some things around mixer testing, particle size analysis, and even biosecurity. Roger Cochran brought that up, so I thought that was really good. Moving to Dr. Boyd's talk on feeding to optimize performance and viability of growing pigs. I think he's continued to bring to light over the last couple of decades that soybean meal is likely more than just an amino acid source. Looks like it serves as a functional ingredient. And there's two different scenarios here. When pigs are under high health conditions, if we take out too much soybean meal, it looks like we impact growth performance, and that's regardless of essential amino acids, non-essential amino acids, DEB balance, or minimum protein. And I think he proposed in the presentation, a lot of us will put a minimum crude protein constraint in formulation. Maybe that needs to be a minimum soybean meal constraint in formulation. The other piece is, the other scenario is under situations where pigs are health challenged. I think he's provided really good evidence that under a respiratory challenge in particular, whether that's PRRS or mycoplasma, that soybean meal becomes an important ingredient for those pigs that are health challenged. And I don't know when it was, but it was a popular press article, and I remember Dean had proposed the idea of a diet library for health versus sick pigs. And certainly there's some implementation challenges with that, having a couple different diet sets. But in today's industry, we're faced with a lot of endemic and epidemic disease. It's changed, and so I don't think this is certainly out of line, and could be a real possibility as we continue to move forward. Heard from Neil Ferguson on the role of modeling in nutrition and management. I think what we learned from that is modeling is a tool that certainly can help us make faster or high quality decisions. A lot of times we're put into spots where we may not have research to back up the decision, or we don't have time to get the answer. And I think that's where modeling can help us. It was pointed out that we don't use a lot of models or a lot of modeling people, perhaps in our industry. That's a resource that we probably should be looking to incorporate into our business management practices. It goes without saying is, with all models, they're only as good as the inputs that go into them. And I think you do need to, if you're going to use a model, there probably needs to be a validation step and then some type of continued improvement process, and update those models as you learn more. Heard from Amy Petrie. She did a really good job presenting on Xylenase and the physiology of how Xylenase works. And what I got from that presentation, hope you did too, is Xylenase is a potential tool to improve pig performance and or livability. She did a really nice job of proposing multiple mechanisms on how performance and or health can be improved with Xylenase or perhaps carbohydrases. She pointed out the importance of having the right enzyme, the right substrate, and the right dose. And we characterize that as that is the right concept, but how do we do this practically? And then we do need formulation tools to help us decide on how to do this. It's not as straightforward as putting, X enzyme in at X rate when you've got a multitude of different feed ingredients and different phases or stages of production. So we certainly have a lot more to learn on how to effectively use carbohydrates in swine diets. Dr. Kellner talked about dietary fat and implications for diet formulation. Take home here is looking at the equations that are in NRC 2012, the Posse equation, versus some of the good work he did in graduate school. I think both those equations provide really good estimates, and just did some quick math last night. If you look at those equations for choice white grease, they're within 99 to 101% of actual based on the validation work that was done. It's really good. And then corn oil is 103 to 109%. And Trey brought a good, wrap up to his presentation in the fact that, those prediction equations do result in different diet cost sets, but which one's right, and does it really matter given the small differences? At a 3% inclusion of fat, that's about 24 kcals per kilogram difference based on the differences in those equations. And Trey pointed out you'll never measure that in closeout performance, but I'm not sure that we could even measure it in a controlled research study either. And so the last point, I think, with that in mind, we've got really good equations, so instead of challenging the equations, perhaps we need to spend more of our time verifying our energy calibration curves, both in sows and wean to finished pigs, particularly given the high cost of fat. So the next topic, Wayne cast hog wild. I told Wayne on Tuesday night that title did not give him the ability to take his clothes off during this presentation. I've not seen Wayne cast hog wild, but we got to see a glimpse of it this morning. And the only thing that was missing this morning with Wayne was a cigar and a glass of bourbon. But certainly a very entertaining kickoff to that session. But more seriously, looking at what was discussed there, one thing that's certain is our industry is going to change. But we have proven as an industry our ability to adapt and overcome, particularly as consumer trends change on us. And this industry is certainly dealing with a lot of challenges right now. These aren't going away soon. We've got ASF looming in the Dominican. With that said, we've got a lot of tools in our toolbox that we can leverage to take on these challenges, and we've done that. Innovation, planning, and execution are going to be key in taking on those challenges just like they've done before. I think as we look at 2020 and even now, we've had a lot of lessons from COVID-19, and that gives us an opportunity to apply those lessons learned to new challenges into the future. Dr. Stanley talked about livestock microbiota and manipulation through nutrition. She pointed out there's a lot of molecular and statistical tools that have been developed to increase our understanding of those microbial populations and certain phenotypes based on those microbial populations. It looks like there's opportunities to alter the gut microbiota to improve health and or performance of the animal. Another key point that she brought up that I think is very applicable as we walk out of here is we need to colonize piglets on day one with good bacteria, which is going to require us to manipulate microbial populations in the sow, not the piglet. And I think we've all heard it or experienced it, but the industry is going through a lot of enteric challenges right now in nursery pigs. And I think from her talk, it looks like we need to look upstream at the sow farm on factors that may be influencing those microbial populations. Today, we're using nutrition as a Band-Aid, possibly for a bigger issue, and we're just late to the party trying to solve it with just nutrition alone. Move to Dr. Coma's talk on livestock. Oh, that's a duplication, sorry. Dr. Coma, he talked about several different things in his talk, and one was nutrient variability and the need to account for nutrient variability in your ingredients, that the average is important, but almost equally important is understand the variation in your ingredients, and NIR is certainly a rapid analysis tool that allow you to do this more effectively, perhaps. And then based on some of the amino acid studies that they did, he certainly recognizes that amino acids are a major determinant of protein deposition, and it's a very expensive nutrient, so you need to understand the animal's nutrient requirements for amino acids, particularly lysine and other essential amino acids. He also talked about raising pigs without antibiotics and zinc, and I think he did a good job telling us that we need to have a multifaceted approach beyond just nutrition to take that on. And then as you look at some of the sustainability concerns that they've experienced there in Spain, it looks like they've been able to address a lot of those already through nutritional research and implementation. Moving to Dr. Gabler's talk, what we learned about thoughts on feeding pigs during times of stress and disease. I think he said a mouthful when he said nutrition by health is complicated. And as you look at nutritional targets, he identified 3 things: prevention, treatment, and or recovery to focus on. And certainly Nick's done a lot of good work at the university level and a fair amount under commercial conditions. And one of the traits that we certainly have good intentions to measure is mortality because of the economic value to a production system, but it certainly is more difficult to measure because of the number of experimental units you have to have. But that's something we need to definitely keep top of mind, is how do we collect mortality data, particularly as we look at some of these potential nutritional interventions. We know from the challenge studies that Nick presented that nutrient partitioning and metabolism priorities are being altered. It looks like there's a benefit of feeding fiber in enterically challenged pigs, particularly if it's soluble fiber. And then the pig's nutrient requirement for things like amino acids, in the data that Nick presented, lysine to calorie ratio tends to change based on PER status. And there's an opportunity early in infection that you may want to look at altering dietary lysine to ME ratios during that point of infection to improve animal performance. Moved to Dr. Pilcher and his group talking about raising pigs without antibiotics and other technologies. Dr. Greiner talked about really leveraging past, present, and future research findings to help us feed pigs without antibiotics and or other technologies. And Steve went through some of the meta-analysis that Dr. Gabler and Wes Shear presented a few years ago are put together, and I think the take-home there is there are some alternatives to AGPs, and positive responses are observed 30 to 40% of the time. And as you look at sustainability of some of these programs, it will require collaboration of multiple stakeholders, and that's certainly been confirmed by our European counterparts. The next thing I want to mention, it was touched on briefly in some of the presentations, but water continues to be a forgotten nutrient in our industry that could be impacting health more than we know. And I'll put a plug in for Dr. Patience, because in the back of your program, there's going to be a book released in 2022 that's going to discuss water. But that's something I think we overlook a lot, is the impact of water on health. As we look at systems that have removed antibiotics and or zinc, the good news is there are systems that have been successful, but it's certainly been a journey to get there. Move to Dr. Stein's talk this afternoon on estimated NE of diets and feed ingredients for ad libitum feeds using indirect calorimetry. It's really exciting that we're going to get that resource here in the U.S. Dr. Stein and his lab have certainly been very instrumental in helping us understand ingredients, particularly amino acids and energy, but getting us moved to a net energy system, particularly as we deal with high fiber, high protein feedstuffs, is going to be important to keep a competitive advantage to some of our global counterparts. And I really appreciate the fact that he's not just running out there and throwing chambers together. He's done his homework. He's doing his homework. He's went across the globe to get input on how we can accelerate our knowledge of more accurate NE estimates for our feedstuffs and diets. And from his plan, it looks like he's going to have a continuous improvement process that allow us to continue to get better over time. The last presentation by Dr. Tokash, in terms of where we headed with branched-chain amino acids and swine nutrition in general. I think as we look at a lot of the corn co-products we feed, certainly there's some challenges. When we feed high levels, we start getting into some excesses of leucine. But the thing is, with corn co-products, they're not going away, so we got to figure out how to feed them successfully. And Dr. Tokash and his group and several other universities are focused on this. And it looks like we do need to make adjustments in formulation when we get into high leucine levels, particularly on isoleucine, valine, and trip. The good news is there's some really good models to help us predict these adjustments in formulation. So just to wrap up here, just thanks again to the organizing committee. I know there's a lot of work that was done behind the scenes and during this event to make this thing happen. I want to thank the co-chairs, the speakers, the moderators, and the panelists for a really good program over the last couple of days. As we wrap up, I'm hopeful that everyone took at least one takeaway from the last couple of days that they can apply and or explore further when they leave today. Third point here, really want to thank Dr. Patience. It's been said multiple times for his humble service to our industry. Thank you, Dr. Patience. It's been good working with you, and wish you the best in retirement. And the nice thing, yeah. I think there was about 250 people registered for this meeting, and that really speaks to how good a program this is. When you have good programs, you get a lot of people to them, and it's been good seeing everybody at this. I think everybody's been caged up long enough, and good to see everybody's faces, and wish everybody safe travels on their way home. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Aaron, again for that excellent summary. I just want to finish up with very brief comments. and reiterate what Aaron said. I specifically would like to recognize Stacy Gould, tremendous work. She's really been the workhorse in getting all the details looked after, and we really appreciate that, working with Julie Kiefer. I want to thank the program committee, Cassie Jones, Trey Kellner, and Chad Pilcher, because they're the ones that really put the program together. Just final comment about me, or my retirement. And just as I reflect back, I said it last night, and I'm going to say it again because it's true, and it's really important, and it's a message I'd like you to take home. And this is a good industry with really good people in it. And just as one example, when I first moved here, I had lots of pig experience, but I didn't have very much Iowa experience. And fortunately, the culture of Iowa is very similar to the culture of Saskatchewan. But I hadn't been here very long when I got a phone call from Bart Borg, and Bart says to me, John, would you like to go for a ride with me? I'll take you up to our mill in Algona and show you around the mill, and we can talk about Iowa agriculture on the way. Well, we did talk about agriculture on the way, and on the way, and on the way. But the thing that really impressed me, the one message that I took home from that visit was, as we went through that feed mill, Bart said hello to every person working in that mill by first name. And I thought, this is the kind of industry I'd like to be part of. This is an industry that is very personable, and people are important. So the message I'd like to leave with you is, as you see new people coming into our industry, whether it's young people coming up through the education or new people moving into the state or into your states, do a Bart Borg, right? Do something for them to help them feel welcome, to help them to learn a little more quickly about their new home, and it just makes our community just that much better. So with that, I say thank you so very much. 12 wonderful years in Iowa and Iowa State, in the pig industry, and I wish you safe travels home this evening. Thank you so very much.
If anyone is missing a set of keys, we have found a lost set of keys at the information desk.